I knew my time was up. The second I caught my reflection in the conference room glass. Me 59 years old in a navy cardigan worn thin at the elbows, clutching my leather-bound notebook, and across from me sprawled in the corner office chair like he'd been born. There sat Derek Caldwell. Not the CEO, just the CEO's nephew freshly parachuted in from some California startup internship. Apparently, firing a 20-year veteran was his idea of proving himself. He didn't ask me to sit, just leaned back, arms folded, smirk set, ready to deliver his rehearsed line. Be grateful for your last three $800 paycheck, he said, stretching out the numbers like he was savoring them. It wasn't the money that stung. It was the precision, not $4,000, not even rounded, but $3,800. A deliberate undercut. A final insult loud enough for the assistant outside to hear. 2 decades of late nights design wins and solutions that had saved this Chicago manufacturing firm during 2 economic downturns, all reduced to a sarcastic send-off. I didn't flinch. I slipped the check into my folder like it was a coupon for free fries, nodded once. Thanks for letting me know. And I was already halfway out the door. Quick side note, apparently. 97% of people who listen to stories like this don't subscribe. If you're one of them, fix that. It keeps the stories coming. I passed 3 coworkers on the way back to my desk, each suddenly fascinated by their screens. One coughed into his coffee. Another typed like he was racing a stopwatch. Nobody wanted to be linked to whatever had just gone down in the glass box. Derek had that effect, the smug confidence of someone who'd never had to solve a real problem. At my desk, I opened the bottom drawer, pulled out the cardboard box I'd hoped I'd never need, and began packing up 20 years of my professional life. The framed photo of the founder shaking my hand after my first patent approval. The crooked lettered mug my old team gave me. Design Witch. A small stack of prototype sketches I kept, not because I needed them, but because they reminded me why I cared about this place. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him stroll past. Tough break, he said, mock sympathy dripping. Nothing personal, just saving the company money. Then he winked like we were in on the same joke. What he didn't know, and I didn't bother correcting, was that the founder and I had ensured years ago I'd never walk out of here empty-handed. Back when Aldertech was still hungry, just 12 of us crammed into a drafty Chicago loft sweating through all-night problem-solving marathons, the founder Thomas Greer leaned across his paper-strewn desk and said, "If they ever try to cheapen, you cheapen themselves out of business." Then he slid a sheet of paper toward me. It was a clause. Odd, precise, almost absurd. I laughed at the time. Now at 59, as I slid my sketchbooks into the box, that clause was burning in my mind. My signed copy sat at home locked in a fireproof safe. I hadn't kept it because I expected to need it, but because Thomas once told me one day you might. I taped the box shut, hefted it to my hip, and walked the carpeted aisle like just another Friday layoff. The air felt heavier with every step. No one spoke. No one dared make eye contact. I didn't need their sympathy. I had the only words that mattered carved into my memory, the single line that would turn Derek Caldwell's smug little firing into the costliest mistake Aldertech had ever made. At the elevator, I caught my reflection again. Same cardigan, same steady expression. But behind my eyes, there was a fuse burning. I'd moved through my desk like a surgeon, slow and precise, making sure every small thing I cared about left with me. The silence was strange, too loud, too careful. People I'd mentored, defended in meetings, now glued to their monitors like their careers depended on whatever email they pretended to type. It wasn't personal. They were just trying not to be the next one summoned to the glass box. Derek reappeared, swagger intact, slowing at my cubicle to rest a hand on the divider. "Nothing against you," he said, tone faux casual. "Just trimming the fat. Gotta save the company money." He said it like announcing we'd run out of cupcakes at the holiday party. I didn't give him the glare he deserved. Instead, I slipped the last notebook into the box and sealed it with a clean strip of tape. His cologne, too much of something expensive, lingered after he left. As he strolled toward sales, I caught him muttering to one of the reps, "Saved us a fortune today." I let the words land not as an insult but as a receipt. The scent of printer toner and burnt coffee pulled me back not to this day, but 15 years ago in Thomas's cramped office before we moved into glass and steel. Before the nephew. Before anyone forgot who built the bones of this place. Downtown Aldertech had once been a cramped loft with second-hand desks, not a glass and steel headquarters talking market share like we were Fortune 500. I still remember Thomas Greer leaning over my shoulder studying the design that would later carry the company through 2 recessions. You realize he'd said, tapping the blueprint, "This will be the backbone of everything we make." I'd laughed thinking he was just hyping me up. But he meant it. That afternoon, he called me into his cluttered office, slid a mug of coffee across the desk, and said he wanted to tweak my contract. I assumed he meant a raise. "If you want to see exactly how I use those patents to turn the tables even further, stick around and hit that subscribe button. The next chapter is where the real payoff begins." Instead, he pulled out a single sheet with a clause so oddly specific I thought it was a joke. "This one's just for you. You built this thing. If they ever try to cheapen you, they cheapen themselves out of business." We both laughed, then not knowing how sharp those words would sound echoing in my head 15 years later. I signed without hesitation, treating it like a founder's sentimental gesture. Now, with a cardboard box under my arm and Derek Caldwell's smug cost-saving speech still ringing, that clause felt less like sentiment and more like a loaded weapon I'd been carrying all along. I glanced one last time at my stripped desk, the spot where I'd solved problems at 2 a.m., sketched napkin ideas that became million-dollar products. Just beige laminate and a coil of cables now. They'd think I was walking out quietly. They'd think it was over. But I'd already started writing the ending in my head. And it wouldn't be quiet. It would be expensive. I didn't look back when the elevator doors closed. By the time I reached the parking garage, the office was already a stale memory. The box sat on the passenger seat, buckled in like it was fragile. In a way, it was. The air outside bit at my skin, and I let the silence of the drive settle, only the hum of the engine filling the space where all the fake sympathy had been. 10 blocks from Aldertech, I pulled into my bank's drive-thru, slid the $3,800 check into the tube, and watched it vanish. That was the last cent they'd pay me on their terms. The deposit slip was still warm when I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years. My lawyer, the one who reviewed my first patent with Thomas over a decade ago, he answered on the second ring. "Haven't heard from you in a while." "What's going on?" I didn't waste time. "Do you remember the founder's clause?" I asked. A pause. "You mean that oddball one about compensation thresholds?" "Exactly." I reached into the box beside me and pulled my personal copy of the contract from between 2 worn project binders. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still bold, a time capsule from the day Thomas and I signed it. I read it aloud, word for word. "If at any point during the term of this agreement the employee's monthly base pay shall fall below $4,000, all patents, designs, and intellectual property authored by the employee and currently licensed to the company shall immediately and irrevocably revert to the employee's sole ownership." When I finished, silence, then a slow, deliberate exhale. "They're about to regret this," he said, measured, certain. The same tone he'd used years ago when we shut down a competitor for copying my design. Back then, it was about protection. Now, it was about owning Aldertech's lifeblood. "Send me a copy tonight," he continued. "Don't talk to anyone there. Don't post about it. Let them think you're gone. I'll start the paperwork." I agreed. When the call ended, I sat in my car watching the world move around me. People with takeout bags, a man yelling into a Bluetooth headset, a teenager balancing a coffee on his skateboard. None of them knew that 1 mile away a company was patting itself on the back for saving $200 on my last paycheck, not realizing they'd just handed me the keys to their kingdom for a discount. I slipped the contract back into its folder and set it on the seat beside me. It felt heavier than paper, more like leverage, the kind that could split a boardroom wide open. This wasn't about a job anymore. It was about ownership control and deciding exactly how much it would cost them to get it back. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my lawyer had already emailed a secure upload link. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of bitter, overbrewed coffee, not for comfort, but fuel. Every page went into the scanner, my signature, the founder's neat slanted handwriting, and that one lethal paragraph sitting quietly on page 6 like an unexploded mine. 15 minutes later, the files were gone from my desktop, locked in his encrypted archive. He called soon after. "It's clean," he said. "Everything's enforceable. We'll let the trigger activate automatically on the date. Don't contact anyone. Don't hint. Let them think they've won." It was exactly the advice I wanted. No theatrics, just timing. The next few days felt like watching a slow-motion car wreck, except I wasn't in the car anymore. Aldertech's LinkedIn lit up with a polished post about successful cost-cutting and streamlining for future growth. Front and center was Derek Caldwell's grinning face, quoted about making hard decisions to keep us competitive. If he'd had the self-awareness of a paperweight, he might have realized cutting me loose wasn't saving the ship, it was pulling the engine mid-ocean. But he didn't. He doubled down. A friend in accounting, one of the few still brave enough to text me, said Derek had been spotted at a bar holding court like a war hero. He bragged about slashing dead weight and freeing up cash for innovation, whatever that meant in his world. At one point, he toasted the table and said, "Some people are replaceable. You just have to be the one willing to do it." Every word dug him deeper, not just with me, but with anyone who might face him in a boardroom when this all blew up. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. The beauty of a trap like this was letting your opponent build their own walls, then locking the only exit from your side. Meanwhile, my lawyer worked quietly like a chess player setting up checkmate. He drafted the patent reversion filings, the licensing fee schedule, and even a retroactive invoice for Aldertech's continued use of my designs once the clause took effect. All dated, numbered, and ready to drop the moment the calendar rolled over. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd vanished. No angry posts, no calls to colleagues, no whispers about lawsuits. I was a ghost. And they thought ghosts didn't bite. But I watched every post, every smug update, every tone-deaf celebration, satisfied in my silence, because I knew what they didn't. The moment that clause triggered, their cost-cutting win would become the most expensive mistake in company history. The morning it happened, I woke before my alarm. No anxiety, no dread, just the quiet alertness that comes when you know something important is about to land in your lap. The date on my phone stared back like a finish line: 30 days since the $800 paycheck. 30 days since Derek's smirk. And today, the countdown ended. 30 days since they'd unknowingly reached under their own foundation and loosened the load-bearing bolts. By mid-morning, my lawyer called. His voice had that almost playful calm I'd heard only once before, when we'd won a patent dispute so decisively, the opposing lawyers skipped the final hearing. "It's done," he said. "The clause is active. Every patent design derivative work all back under your sole ownership. The patent office has acknowledged receipt. Legally, they no longer own the backbone of their business." I leaned back in my kitchen chair, sunlight spilling across the floor. For a moment I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurdly clean it all was. No shouting, no courtroom drama, just a quiet flip of a switch. My mind drifted back to Thomas Greer's office years ago when this was just a hypothetical. He'd sat back, tie loosened, staring at the first working prototype that would change Aldertech forever. You know, he'd said people get cheap when they get comfortable. They forget what got them here. If they ever try to cheapen you, they cheapen themselves out of business. I'd smiled, thinking it was just loyalty talk. But he'd been dead serious, even tapped the contract with his pen. "This clause isn't for now. It's for later. You'll know when later gets here." Later was here. I opened my email and there it was, a clean PDF from my lawyer's subject line, confirmation of reversion of rights. My name in bold at the top of the ownership line. Aldertech's name absent from everything that mattered. It looked almost too simple to be real. But it was. From that moment on, every cent they earned from those products passed through a toll booth with my name on it. The strange thing was, there was no rush, no swelling, triumphant music, no cinematic montage of revenge, just a steady, grounded certainty. Today wasn't the strike. Today was about reclaiming what was mine. The strike would come when they realized how much it would cost to keep breathing through the lungs I'd just taken back. I closed the email, picked up my coffee, and looked out at the street below. People walked by with grocery bags, checked their phones, waited for the light to change, unaware that a mile away, an entire company had just lost control of the one thing keeping it alive. And they'd sold it back to me for $3,800. I had the power now, and I wasn't going to waste it making them squirm too soon. That part I wanted to savor. Just after lunch, the facts went out. One page, crisp and merciless, my lawyer had distilled months of potential litigation into a single airtight document. At the top, licensing fee schedule, effective immediately. The heading alone could make a CFO sweat. Below it, clean bullet points. Annual licensing fee for continued use of all reverted patents, 7 figures due at the start of each fiscal year. Retroactive usage fees calculated from the date of my $3,800 paycheck to the present. Penalty interest for late payment steep enough to make them consider selling furniture on eBay. No legalese, no wiggle room, just math and the brutal truth that without paying me, Aldertech couldn't make or sell their flagship product. The fax machine on the executive floor spat out the page with mechanical indifference. Derek Caldwell happened to pick it up. A receptionist later told me he barely glanced at it before smirking. "Cute," he said, like it was some prank from a bitter ex-employee. He folded it in half, tossed it on his desk, and let it sit there for 40 minutes. 40 minutes bragging on the phone about his clean layoff. 40 minutes believing the game was over. Then his phone rang, direct line from the board chairman's office. Not the CEO, his uncle, but the chairman himself. The man who'd been in the room when Thomas Greer and I wrote that clause years ago. "Bring that fax to me," the chairman said, voice flat. Thinking it was a formality, Derek strolled down the hall with the paper dangling from his fingers. A junior assistant swore she heard the door slam behind him. 10 minutes later, voices rose. The chairman wasn't yelling, he didn't have to. That was the kind of man who could gut you with a whisper. Derek's voice, however, climbed higher, like someone trying to argue their way out of a locked trunk. Inside, the board's legal counsel had already confirmed what the facts stated. The patents were mine, the fees enforceable. Without them, Aldertech's assembly lines might as well be a row of idle lawn chairs. When the door finally opened, Derek didn't strut out. He looked pale, phone clenched in one hand, the fax crumpled in the other. He didn't head for his office. He went straight to his uncle's, and the blinds stayed drawn for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't need to hear the conversation. I already knew. The trap had sprung, and for the first time since he'd sat in that glass office and smirked at me, Derek Caldwell understood this wasn't about a paycheck. It was about ownership, and it wasn't his. The panic didn't start loud. It began with that heavy silence you only get in a boardroom when everyone is staring at the same page, and no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. My lawyer told me later the board's general counsel read the facts twice, lips moving, before finally saying, "This is airtight." From there, the scramble began. The patents weren't disputed or under review. They were mine, registered with the U.S. Patent Office, retroactively protected from the date of my $3,800 paycheck. No gray area, no loophole. The operations VP ran the numbers on the spot. Without those patents, the production line would halt within a week. No production meant no shipments. No shipments meant breach of contract penalties from every major client. The CFO, a man who could spin bad news into at least a tolerable quarterly update, just sat rubbing his temple. By mid-morning, the first client calls hit. A medical device supplier wanted to confirm rumors about delays. A European distributor asked if they should postpone their launch. By early afternoon, a key government client demanded written assurance delivery dates would be met. Legal couldn't give it. That's when the smell of real fear settled in. I knew all this not because I was there, but because the updates flowed to me in quiet streams from loyal voices. One text from my old project manager, "They're losing it. You'd love this." Another from a sales lead Derek's hiding in his office. CEO's not taking calls. Place is vibrating. I didn't rush to check news feeds or LinkedIn. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed with screenshots of the half-baked "We remain committed" statements they were trying to push to clients. It was all theater, and I knew the truth. Without my signature on a licensing agreement, they were dead in the water. Sitting in my living room, coffee in hand, I watched a neighbor's kid wobble down the sidewalk on a new bike. Somewhere downtown, a multi-million-dollar operation was unraveling thread by thread, all because one overconfident heir thought saving $200 on my paycheck was a victory. The satisfaction wasn't hot, it was steady, certain. It was cold and precise, like holding a scalpel and knowing exactly where to make the cut. They were scrambling, but the real conversation hadn't begun. That would happen when they called not to issue statements but to beg for terms, and I already knew the price. The first call to my lawyer came at 9 a.m. the next day. Not from the CEO, and certainly not from Derek Caldwell, but from the board's appointed negotiator, the kind of smooth talker meant to look calm while the building burned. He opened with polite compliments about my long-standing contributions, then slid into the real pitch. "We'd like to make this go away quickly. A lump sum today in exchange for full rights back to the company. We can have paperwork in an hour." My lawyer didn't even look my way. "The licensing agreement stands. Non-negotiable. Terms have been sent. First year's payment is due in advance along with retroactive fees." Silence. I pictured the negotiator pinching the bridge of his nose. "The number you've proposed is substantial," he said. "It's designed to be my lawyer," replied, ending the call. That was their polite approach. The next wasn't. Just after lunch, my phone lit up with a number I recognized. I let it ring out. Seconds later, a text pickup. "This is important." I considered ignoring it, then decided I wanted to hear him squirm. No greeting when I answered. No small talk. Just Derek straight into panic mode. "Look, I know we've had our differences, but you're about to sink the entire company. People's jobs are on the line here." I let him ramble. Desperation poured through the line appeals to our shared history, guilt trips about employees, families, investors. Finally, I cut in. "Do you remember the last thing you said to me in that glass office silence? You told me to be grateful for my last $800 paycheck. I am, because without it, we wouldn't be having this conversation." He started to reply, but I hung up. By evening, my lawyer confirmed the board understood exactly what they faced. The licensing fees weren't just a one-time hit, they were a recurring hemorrhage. Millions every year with penalties for late payment that could gut their operating budget. And every word of it was perfectly legal. The stakes weren't abstract anymore. This wasn't just about writing me a check. It was about whether Derek Caldwell kept his cushy job, whether the CEO survived the next shareholder meeting, and whether Aldertech made it to the end of the quarter without shutting down its core product line. They'd tried to play cheap. Now they were about to learn what expensive looked like. The boardroom felt smaller than I remembered, though. Maybe it was the way everyone inside seemed to be folding inward. The polished table was cluttered with untouched coffee cups, legal pads scrawled with numbers, and the faint smell of panic under expensive cologne. The CEO sat at the head tie, loosened eyes bloodshot. Derek was pale, his smirk gone, staring like the wolf had already stepped inside. I didn't sit right away. I let the room take me in my heels, clicking against the floor. They'd expected my lawyer alone. Instead, they got me calm, composed, carrying a slim leather folder like the fuse to their last stick of dynamite. "Let's make this quick," I said, sliding the folder to the center. Inside was the real licensing agreement, the one that made their lump sum offer look like a lemonade stand. Annual licensing fees, I began low seven figures paid in advance each fiscal year. Retroactive usage fees from the date of my last paycheck, interest calculated penalties for late payment per Section 4, and one final condition: all marketing materials, packaging, and investor decks will carry my name as sole patent owner. Permanently. A murmur rippled through the room. One older board member leaned forward. "That last condition non-negotiable," I cut in. "You want the product, you want the patents, you acknowledge the source. My name is part of your brand now." Across from me, the CFO's pen tapped the table, fast and nervous. "This is a lot." I leaned back, unbothered. "It's cheaper than shutting down your core business." The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Finally, the chairman, stoic and unreadable, nodded once. "Get the papers." In under 10 minutes, assistants returned with printed copies. One by one, board members signed, pens scratching reluctantly. No one met my eyes. Derek's signature was last, his hand trembling just enough for me to notice. When the final page slid back to me, I placed it in my folder, stood, and offered the same small smile I'd worn the day he told me to be grateful for my last $800 paycheck. No speeches, no gloating. Just done. I turned without another word, walked to the door, and left them sitting in the stale air of their own making. No one followed me. The only sound was the soft click of the latch as it shut behind me. By the time I reached the elevator, the deal was already binding: signatures, inked dates, stamped clauses, locked. The assistants were probably still gathering stray pens and coffee cups from the table, while the board tried to process exactly what they'd just agreed to. As the doors slid shut, I realized I wasn't just walking away with my patents. I was walking away owning the one part of Aldertech they couldn't function without, the backbone of their flagship product, the very thing they'd once decided was replaceable. All the late nights, the prototypes sketched on diner napkins, the testing runs in that old drafty loft with space heaters under the desks, it all belonged to me again. And now, every time they sold a unit, every dollar of revenue that ran through those designs, it would pass through a toll booth with my name on it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek Caldwell, who'd told me to be grateful for my last $800 paycheck, had just signed a contract that would cost Aldertech millions every year for as long as they kept the lights on. Outside, the cold Chicago air hit my face like a reset button. I stepped onto the sidewalk, leather folder tucked under my arm, and felt the weight of it, not heavy, but solid. The kind of weight that comes with leverage you earned the hard way. I didn't rush. I let the rhythm of my steps carry me toward the parking garage, letting the noise of the city wash over me. Taxis, honking, a street vendor shouting about hot dogs, the faint hum of the L in the distance. Ordinary sounds on an extraordinary day. Sliding into the driver's seat, I rested the folder on the passenger side. My reflection in the rear view wasn't gloating, just steady, certain. The fight was over, but the victory would echo for years. I thought of the people still inside Aldertech, the ones who'd kept their heads down when I left. Maybe some of them would remember today as the moment they learned just how valuable a single person's work can be. And for anyone else watching from the sidelines, well, cubicle warriors, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own.